Let me turn to something else which will put under scrutiny your commitment to openness and transparency, and that's the First Marine International report. Can you explain to us why you are not prepared to release that into the public domain?
Again, as I've said already, we do absolutely remain committed to transparency. The the First Marine International report is an important piece of work. It was commissioned in the summer of last year, and the report was produced in January this year. It provides a detailed assessment of what it would take to really bring the productivity of the yards up to the standards that is required of a typical Northern European shipyard, so that the yard is fully able to seize the opportunities that the CEO has already alluded to, and so that we can do everything possible to ensure that the yard enjoys a strong commercial future. That piece of work, by its very nature, goes into detail about where the yard is currently performing well and where the productivity challenges are greatest, and what needs to be done in order to address those. And that information is inherently commercially sensitive. So this is an area where freedom of information legislation does provide exemptions so that information that is commercially sensitive, which if released into the public domain, could impact on the competitiveness, the ability to win and compete and win new business. The legislation provides a basis upon which the commercial sensitivity of that information can be protected, and that would be appropriate in this case.
But according to your letter to me, when I add in the VAT, £250,000 of public money has been spent on commissioning that FMI report. And you're saying that there is nothing about it that can be published.
It is a very important piece of work. It's absolutely right that we commissioned first-class, external, independent technical advice that allows us to understand in detail what it would take to bring the productivity of the yards up to the average standard for a Northern European shipyard, so that FPMG is well placed to win new orders and to get on that path to a sustainable commercial future. So that sort of advice may not come cheaply, but it is very important, and it's absolutely integral to the work that's underway in the yard at the moment to develop a long-term business plan. It's still ongoing, but that work is really important, and this is what it takes. This is one of the things that is necessary in order to make sure that the right decisions are taken to put the yard onto that pathway towards a sustainable future.
Why is the report covered by a non-disclosure agreement?
So there is no non-disclosure agreement between the Scottish Government and FMI. Okay. When the report was commissioned, and I should add, there was an open procurement exercise and competition to before FMI was appointed to do this work. At the point when FMI was appointed to do the work, there was a discussion about whether a non-disclosure agreement between the Scottish Government and FMI was needed. And the view of officials at that point was that it wasn't, because the Freedom of Information legislation provided adequate protection for commercially sensitive information. And in this case, this very clearly would be commercially sensitive information, so we felt that adequate protection was provided then. Separately, and the CEO may wish to speak to this point, the yards entered into a non-disclosure agreement with FMI, but I might pass to David Tideman to speak to that point.
Yeah, Mr. Tideman.
Yes. Because the contract was between FMI and Scottish Government direct, there were terms of confidentiality, I understand, in that contract between the two parties. It's entirely appropriate that before FMI released information to us and FMPG back to FMI that we needed an NDA between us because we weren't party to the actual contract terms of the engagement.
Okay, so whose name is at the bottom of that contract with FMI? Is it the Scottish Government or is it FMPG?
It's direct between FMI and Scottish Government. We had to share information with FMI, and FMI have intellectual property in the way in which they compare shipyards across the world, and that's so it was something that was important to them in their terms and conditions that they protect that IP, the way in which they develop the algorithms.
But when I look at the FMI website, they say we act with integrity and transparency, holding ourselves to the highest standards. So why were they? Because as I read reports about this, it was FMI who instigated the non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't the client who was buying the services of FMI. It was the contractor themselves.
It was mutual between the senior director in FMI and me, where we were about to share information that was sensitive, and as I said, it was outside of the contract between FMI and Scottish Government, so it was entirely appropriate to have a commercial NDA in those circumstances of sharing information.
But again, you understand, Mr. Tideman, that £250,000 of public money has been spent on this piece of work, and we're being told that we can't have any sight of it whatsoever.
I do understand that. The document is the property of Scottish Government, made available to me, but it's Scottish Government's decision.
So it's Mr. Irwin's door we should be knocking on.